I know had there not been a God, I would not have a piece of paper because of the
I say
anger.
the same thing for me.
Yes, because of the anger and the lack of a mature way to deal with that anger
Mhm.
in certain situations. Looking back, I should have been fired sometimes from jobs because I wasn't mature enough to handle what I was confronted with. So now I have a saying that I like to tell my sons and young when I mentor. I say you need to act as confident or more confident than the most mediocre white man.
Well, if you want to introduce yourself and we can get this conversation started.
Well, my name is Janet Green Marbley. I am an attorney here in Columbus, Ohio, with the Supreme Court of Ohio, where I've been for almost 29 years. And I've been practicing since 1979.
That is amazing. Let's talk about GOAT, the OG. So you have been around for a long time doing this work. So I'm sure that you've seen a lot and have a lot of different experiences. I can only imagine what has changed since 79 to 2020. So do you see yourself as driven?
Um, I do. I probably see myself as more driven now. The older I get, I'm more
Okay.
driven than maybe I was in younger years, or at least more driven career wise. Way back when I had other responsibilities, family and otherwise. So now that some of those have subsided, I'm probably more driven career wise now.
Okay. So how so? What does that look like for you?
What it looks like now is trying to decide what to do next and looking at choices that I probably wouldn't have considered years ago. Um, I haven't decided what to do next, haven't decided what to be when I grow up, but I think I have a lot more choices than I did.
Okay. So you see your world kind of opening up a little bit more. You see more opportunity for yourself and you're not afraid to go get it.
Right, right. And
That's
it may not necessarily be in the practice of law, it may be in other areas. But when I first started out, I felt like, well, I've got to do this. I've invested all this time and money that I have to pay back. And so how could I not do this? But now I feel like I have more freedom to do other things that may or may not include practicing law.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Often we think that we're stuck in this one place because we made an investment, but ideally it's like, you know what, you got one life to live. You got
Right,
24 hours in a day like everybody else. What you decide to
right,
do with that, you answer to that when you get to wherever you think you're going after this. So
right, right.
so I think that's amazing and beautiful because we sometimes we limit ourselves, but we don't really have to. So
No.
what does success look like for you? Like, what is your definition of success?
For me, the definition of success is doing what you're passionate about, not what anyone else or the world says you should be doing. But if you can do what you're passionate about and enjoy doing it, then to me, you're successful. Because not very many people get to do that. Some people just get in a lane and they stay in that lane, even though they don't like it. But after investing so much time and money in that lane, they feel like this is where I am. and where I have to stay. And it may be that that lane on the outside looking in is success, but if you're not happy and passionate about doing it, then I wouldn't call myself successful.
Yeah, that's a good thought, just to think about that internal journey, what that really looks like for you. Like, are you happy? Are you fulfilled? And that's
Right.
your definition of success. I think that's awesome, because the world, especially even as like in the legal profession, we often highlight the outside and don't necessarily pay attention to that internal journey and those things that fulfill you. So I think that that is beautiful. What would you say fuels you?
Um, I'm fueled by helping people, responding to social justice issues, um, helping other Black women. I'm fueled by issues that confront Black women, um, and trying to do something about those issues.
Yeah. So Black women, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love me some Black women. They hold me up, keep me together.
Yep,
And I think we make the world go round. I don't know if anybody else agrees with that, and that's okay. So, but I do
yeah.
think Black women help the world go round. So, that is amazing. How does being Black influence your drive?
Well, it influences everything I do, because I don't know that I agree when people say, as a way of saying they aren't racist, I don't see color, because there's no way you can look at me and not see that I'm a Black woman. I
Mm-hmm.
gave a talk to a bar association in Wisconsin on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the first thing I said was, I am a Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that, but to admit that that's who gave this talk doesn't make you a racist, or to say, oh, there was a Black woman there. So to say that you don't see color as a way of proving that you are anti-racist, to me is not understanding what racism is, and the fact that there are people of all different colors in the world, and to see that and appreciate that is something that you should strive for. So I am Black. I am a Black woman that was born in the 50s and raised in the 60s, in college in the 70s. So that means my background, um, is that I grew up when Black people, there were times where, in areas where Black people couldn't vote, where Black people couldn't live, where you couldn't do a lot of things. Those things happened in my lifetime and influenced my thinking and influenced my choices, and to some extent still do. They still do, because I think now it's 2022 and those things still exist. So does that mean, what does that mean for me? It probably means I could have done more, should have done more, can do more, to address and confront those issues.
So what does that, I think you touched on a lot. As you know, you and my mother are around the same age. And so when we talk about being driven while Black, first of all, both of you are, at the top of my list, especially when we talk about Black women. I know my mama my whole life, Hey.
Hmm.
And then, and then I know you most of it. So but looking at that, we don't, especially the generation after me, that we don't necessarily, and probably my generation to be honest, we don't recognize how much has happened in terms of race and progression in the last 30 to 40 years. and even or
Right.
even 50 years. So we look at the civil rights movement. I've spoken to some youth and they're like, "Oh, people are still alive." I'm like, yeah, like my mother was one who was
Yes.
sent to desegregate schools. Like this is not, we're not far removed from this. And it's like we yes, it's not segregated anymore. However, when we look at some of the outcomes, like black lawyers being less than 5% in the profession, and then we're both in Ohio right now, and so with that it's around 3%. So when we're talking about some of these numbers, it's like we still have a lot of work to do. But could you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about your journey and what you've seen over the years as it pertains to being driven by black, especially as a black attorney?
My journey started in um, schools that were supposedly desegregated shortly before I started, but still very much segregated in once you got
Okay.
inside the
Yeah.
school.
Okay.
Um, and the things that happened in those institutions very much influenced what I wanted to do with my life. For example, being told by um, high school counselors that you can be a secretary. What trade schools are you looking at? And there's nothing wrong with that at all if that was my passion, but it was very limiting.
So they eliminated college, for example, as an
They,
option for you.
yes, yes.
Okay.
And so that made me at the time angry, but even more determined to do something with my life. And so starting college with that background or with that kind of educational background meant that I was yearning to learn even more to prove a point. And the one thing when I got to college that I think is really relevant now, when I hear all the conversations about critical race theory, um, when I got to college, that was sort of the beginning of what we called at that time Black history or Black
Studies.
studies.
Mm-hmm.
And I never knew about who I was as a Black person until I got to college and I took Black studies. I was totally unaware of all the things that Black people had done, everything they had written, invented, never taught that.
Oh wow.
So hearing people object to certain things being taught in schools now really rubs me the wrong way because I was taught exactly what they wanted me to learn
Mm-hmm.
and felt like there was nothing Black people did or could do except
Mm.
in the service trades because that was all I saw, that was all I was exposed to. And so I'm angry about that, or I'm driven now to say something about this whole idea of teaching of what kids ought to be taught in school and how you should make a child feel. Because I grew up in an era when I felt like, man, we are nothing but maids and bus
Mm.
drivers or and again those things are not bad but it limited my options, it
Mm-hmm.
limited my view of the world, and you should never limit a child's view of themselves or the world. So that was my first eye-opening experience of Black people and who I was as a Black person. It was in the 70s in college when Black studies departments started cropping up on most campuses, and you got to really study who you were as a race of people and as individuals, and you got exposed to all kinds of opportunities that were out there and available. And then in law school, if there is such a thing as critical race theory, that was my exposure to it, learning
Mm.
about how even though some laws had changed, you still had to enforce them in court and get a court to say, okay, can vote because you are a citizen of the United States, or you can marry
Mm.
who you want to marry, even though they are of another race, or you're entitled to go to whatever school you want to go to. Those things had been laws in some places for many years, but they were not enforced until Supreme Court decisions said this is how those laws have to be enforced and interpreted. So, if there is a critical race theory, by that time, those things were embedded in our institutions, such that even a court saying you've got to do these things
Wasn't
wasn't
enough.
enough in some places.
Wow.
So, yeah, we need to know that. We need to know that things didn't change in society until the law or the judicial branch of government said they had to change. And if that's critical race theory, so be it. Things did not change until people went to court to make them change. And things that didn't change the way institutions have been operating for years and years and years.
So you
So,
bring up a very critical point in terms of, so often when we think about laws, we're like, well, the court said it, so it's done. But it's this, and it's really the position of a lawyer, advocate, or social justice advocate to really make sure that whatever is law is enforced, or for us
right,
to look up what our rights are. So now a lot of people call it civil rights, but it's really being, so you really lived out the civil rights movement, and actually
yes,
you were the movement. You all you all had to
yes,
move during that
yes,
civil rights era to really make sure that whatever was law, whatever you actually were entitled to as a person and a human being, you actually realized that right that you had. It was more than a piece of paper, it was more than something on a
right.
bookshelf. You all actually had to make sure that it was realized.
Right. And to do that, those responsible for enforcing the laws or for actually giving or making those rights come into being were people who, some of whom, many of whom have been institutionalized to think otherwise, to think that no, um, you're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to live next door to this person. So you're not supposed to get a loan to get a mortgage to live in this neighborhood, even though the law prohibits us from discriminating against you. It didn't mean that. That's not what it meant.
Mm.
And people ought to be taught that that's how it is. It's not to make anyone feel bad about themselves. And don't tell me about feeling children feeling bad about themselves, because I grew up at a time when nothing was taught that was positive about me as a Black woman. It just
Mm.
wasn't taught. We wore green on St. Patrick's Day and didn't question it. Um, we didn't do anything, so
Yeah,
it was
Juneteenth
not
wasn't a
until,
celebration at that time, huh?
yeah, I got to high school that I thought, oh, this isn't, why do I wear green on
I'm
St.
not
Patrick's?
Irish.
And there's nothing wrong again with being Irish, but
Celebrating
what's
others, yeah.
wrong with me wearing black or natural hair if you can wear green on St. Patrick's Day? Or what's wrong with us celebrating Juneteenth if you celebrate St. Patrick's Day and drink beer and get drunk?
Because
So
that's you all's cultural celebration. Why can't we
right.
celebrate who we are culturally?
And it's been institutionalized that those cultural celebrations are okay.
Mm-hmm.
But for us to be in a park on Juneteenth, a whole bunch of Black people celebrating our culture scares people.
Right.
And that's a fact. That's not, to me, a critical theory about anything. That's just a fact.
Yeah, I totally that makes a lot of sense. How did you transition those thoughts? Because what you're really talking about is somewhat of your own transformation of being driven while black from what you were taught to how you realize like being black is something that can be celebrated, that should be celebrated, and that I will celebrate. And so with that mentality, that transformation, one I'm sure was challenging, especially
Yeah.
as it shows up as you show up in different spaces and have to challenge the norms, especially when Black History Month probably even wasn't even a thing at the time. So how did you have to, what are some ways that you had to show up as a black woman and challenge yourself, honestly, to do that?
Um, that's one of those things that I meant gets easier, is easier now than it was, because now I'm not afraid to challenge those situations when they present themselves. Um, I have more confidence to when I'm doing that. And again, it's all in the way that it's done, but there was a time when you just felt like, okay, I'm in law school. If I say too much in a class, this professor, and certainly they did then and probably still now, is going to give me a low grade, and I want to get through this situation. I want to get through. My goal is to graduate with a law degree, even though I know most of the people sitting next to me feel like I shouldn't be there because of affirmative action. And I'm not ashamed to say, without affirmative action, I would not have been in law school, not because I wasn't capable, because once I got there, I had the same test, had to do the same things as anybody else, but affirmative action gave me the opportunity to be there to prove that I could do that. So without it, none of the Black people in my class would have been there. And that, again, is not saying we were any less than or any less capable. We proved we were as capable because we got through it. But it was a stigma. It was a stigma that your other colleagues had about you being there, a stigma that many of the professors, not all, but many, had about you being there. So you're already coming in with a label. You've got this label over your head, like, here's my affirmative action Black student that they made capital admit, so that it's like a label you're carrying around on your chest.
Mm,
I am
like that
here.
scarlet
Yeah,
letter concept.
yeah, the scarlet letter concept. And we carried that. And that, I'd be lying to say that didn't affect me, because it did. It on the one hand made me angry, on the other hand made me afraid, because I had to get through this. And I didn't have the kind of support. I'm worrying about financial aid and loans, whether I'm going to be around next semester because I need to pay for it. So I've got that stress in addition to the usual stresses of law school, and the stress of just nobody feeling like nobody wants you there anyway.
Hmm.
So they don't care. Um,
How did you navigate those situations? Did you and the other how many, do you remember how many other black students were there?
In my class, there were 6 of us who graduated,
Okay.
two women and 4 men. Um, when I was there, I think there were amongst all the classes and the night classes, maybe about 20, maybe a little more, and I'm guessing. Um, and so we became very close. We tried to look out for one another. Um, there were some Black lawyers, very few in the city at the time, but there were a few of them who tried to help. And there were at least 2 that I can think of, professors, white professors, who were our real allies, who really
Okay.
tried to help and look out for us, and were very helpful, very, very helpful.
Did you have
Um,
Black professors?
Not in the full-time day. I was a full-time day student, and we didn't, and I think there were a few in the evening program, few practice, maybe one, but I honestly don't remember any full-time professors during the day.
I find that interesting because though I went to law school years, we could count if we wanted to, a couple decades after you. I had a similar experience in terms of
Were there
Black
any?
professors.
None?
No full-time Black professors, and I want to say we probably had about 20 or so Black students, if not less. So I find that's just interesting that
It
you have
is.
that same demographic, and it's still, decades, literally decades later.
Yes. Yes.
That's it's actually disheartening. But
It's very sad. It's
yes,
very sad.
what made you become a Black lawyer? Did you have any lawyers in your family?
No, I was the first person in my family to go to college.
Oh wow.
My sisters went after helping me go. My dad didn't graduate high school. My mom did, and she worked as a secretary. My dad was in the military, and then went to work for where a lot of the Black people worked in Columbus. Then it was called DCSC, the federal.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's called DSCC, um, and that's where they all work. So no one in my immediate family was a college graduate or lawyer. Everyone kind of stepped in to help with me,
Absolutely.
and then went after I did. My aunt, my mom's sister, graduated from college. I'm not sure at what point, but at some point, and so everyone just kind of rallied around me to help me get through, and then went afterwards. So it
Trailblazer.
was, hmm,
Trailblazer.
um, I didn't see it that way, and I still don't see it that way. I just see it as, okay, we've only got so many resources
Mm-hmm.
at this time, and she wants to go now, so let's do this now, and then, we'll wait our turn. So I don't see that as a trailblazer. I see that as having had limited opportunities imposed upon us by society, just by society. And when you have those limited resources, it's like you push this person, and then you wait for the others to come along, which to me is when you have limited opportunities like that, again, I think that's institutional racism.
It is.
And um, I'm thankful for what they all did for me, and thankful that we then turned around and tried to help others.
I think that's awesome. I'm still gonna call you a trailblazer. If you may not like the title, I understand what you're saying. Because you're like, this is the opportunity we have, but you still decided to go on that literally blaze that trail. You were there first. So if no one was there to, cut down the trees as you moved through, that was you blazing the trail for others. And it seems
Yeah.
that others went behind you and decided to pursue that path, whether they went after you or before and sacrificed their time. You still went ahead and blazed that path and trail for others. So I probably can say that you are the my first understanding of a black woman attorney. If I'm thinking about it, you are the first black woman attorney that I was introduced to. And
And I
so,
didn't know any personally
okay.
at all, not at all, until probably I was in law school and the people in the class ahead of me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, but where did black lawyer attorney come from? How did it pop up? When you woke up one day, you just had a dream like, that's it, black attorney.
No, oh
That's all it
no,
is.
no, 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 no.
No. How
But
did it happen?
I think it was a process of watching the civil rights movement on TV
Oh,
and
wow.
looking at people like Thurgood Marshall,
Mm.
um, and then what really did it was in my junior year in high school at Linda McKinley, we had what was the school's first Black History um, celebration. It was just an assembly, and some white students disrupted it,
Oh,
and that started a whole. It was, in fact, a special was on Channel 4 about it not long ago, because it really started a series of racial fights and outbreaks
oh,
in
wow.
At Linda McKinley, and erupted with the police coming in full riot gear,
Oh,
arresting the
wow.
Black students that they could find. Um, all the white students had mysteriously gotten out of the building
Oh,
before,
just in time to be
yeah,
arrested,
just
huh? To
in
not be
time.
arrested.
And that experience was so frightening. It was like, man, the things I've seen happening in the South that you think only
Yeah.
happened in the South
Mhm.
happened here in Columbus because of school desegregation. And having been there, frightened scared to death, that was probably what did it. That
Wow.
was probably what did it. And having had the few Black attorneys that there were at the time come to try to represent the students who were arrested. I was not arrested, thank God. But and it was mostly the male students who were
Okay.
arrested. Um, but having gone through that experience was what did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting and a memorable way to be introduced to law and
Yes.
being on the other side of it as an advocate and an agent of change. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you do now as an attorney?
What I do now happened totally by happenstance, because when I first got out in 1979, I was a legal aid attorney, and I represented people in landlord tenant court,
Okay.
trying to help them keep a roof over their heads,
Mhm.
and quickly discovered that that wasn't enough to pay my student loans and to take care of me, the money that I was making at the time. So then I just started doing a lot of different things. I moved to Chicago to teach, and then got married, started having a family. We came back here. I went to the AG's office, did some trial work in the court of claims. I mean, just doing things to keep a paycheck with no real direction because I hadn't had the time to sit down and develop a plan because the plan was to stay up, pay off these darn student loans and to keep food on the table.
And the lights on, huh?
And I hadn't been exposed to a lot of different areas in the law because there was back then no internet, no cell phones. It was all library hand research. So hadn't been exposed to so many different areas of law that I could have done. So I just finally I got to where I am um, after having been a deputy for an attorney general who lost the election. So I was out of a job and
Oh,
again looking for a job. This came along and it actually turned out to be one that I've become passionate about because it's helping people who have been victims of dishonest lawyers.
okay.
There aren't a lot of dishonest lawyers as people think, but
Mhm.
those who do or who are can do a lot of damage to people, take their money, not do the work, steal big settlements from them. So that's what I do now. There is one of me in every jurisdiction, and we are affiliated with the highest court in the jurisdiction. The money comes from attorney registration fees, and a portion of those fees are allocated to reimburse people who have had money stolen by lawyers. But
Wow.
over the years, and I don't know, you may want to cut this out because I'm so close to retirement, but it is one of the things I want to do in retirement.
Oh,
Over the years, because I've had to, lawyers have to be disciplined
mm-hmm.
in order for us to help. And lo and behold, guess what the largest number of disciplined lawyers look like?
Me and you, huh?
Yes.
Black. And just in
Yes.
case you just listen to the audio, we're black, driven while black. So we're black.
Yes. And, I've started to notice that. And, I was not surprised, but I was surprised, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I know that certainly, just as in the criminal justice system, lawyers aren't the only lawyers who
Right.
violate the code of professional responsibility, but we're the and again, I haven't done the research for obvious reasons. I need my job, I want to retire, but that's one of my goals when I do retire. What
Equity.
does this look like and why does it look like that, and is it like that in every jurisdiction? I would guess that it is because in the criminal justice system it's the same
Yeah,
way.
that's what I was thinking.
um so again, that's where institutional racism comes in. I think I know the disciplinary system for lawyers and I see it, and I can see in some smaller communities, I've been close to it. If a white lawyer comes in and is accused of something, let's just say it's handled differently.
Differently. Yeah.
But I have to preface that by saying I've never done research to confirm that. It's something that I've seen,
Observed.
I've observed. I don't think I know that a lot of the people in the disciplinary arm of the court, I'm not accusing them of being racist. Um, but at the same time, it's an institutional phenomena that until we recognize it and address it, it won't be stopped. There's lots of studies done on it in the criminal justice system. I'm not aware of very many studies having been conducted in lawyer discipline. So that's something I would like to look at to
It sounds like you
verify
have
my what
your
I
theory.
believe is true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's awesome. I'm here for it. I think we often, sometimes we discount our experience and observations because we don't necessarily have the scientific process to back it up. But if like this statistic of less than 5% of lawyers that are Black, that's
Right.
literally just a count. But what we do know is that we have to go through the same process as other lawyers. So what is happening in that process that comes to the result that it is? And it's not that we don't, Black lawyers don't want, Black people don't want to be lawyers. I don't think. I mean, because we can
No.
also talk about the attrition rates. It's not that,
Right.
it's not. So we have to dive deeper and really ask these questions. So I think that is
Right.
a wonderful idea, and I think it's beautiful that in your process, in the work that you've done over the years, you're like, this is what I've noticed. This is an inequitable outcome that I see. We need to do
Right.
more research. I think that
Right.
is awesome. It sounds like you actually have a whole consulting business that's happening, because we have these programs, just as you said, there's one of you in every district. So that means all of
Right.
these districts need to be analyzed. So I don't know, you might
Right.
want to look into the Department of Justice, whenever, I don't know when your retirement is, but maybe I'll look for you and just have it ready by the
Hopefully
time you
not
can.
not sooner than I want after having made the comment, because I've
No,
not
you're gonna be
made
good.
that publicly, but because I don't have the research to back it up. As of now, it's an observation. It's an
It needs
observation
to be
that I've
researched.
seen.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think it needs to be at the end of the day, you notice that's how scientific research happens. You have a hypothesis because you notice something, and then you do the
Right.
research and follow the process so that it's as least biased as possible. So you have the
Right.
scientific data to back it up. But I
Right.
think that is a very your observation is valid. You've done the work long enough to know that this is something that we should ask more questions about.
Right.
One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, I've heard you speak at a panel discussion for women, and you kind of described what your experience was registering for classes for law school. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
That's
That
that
was,
scarlet letter that
yeah,
we just talked about. At that time, again, no electronics to do this. It was all done by hand, and there was a separate line for that seemed to me to be every semester all Black for people getting certain kinds of financial aid. And the freshman year, I think it was just for those of us who were there for a number, for affirmative action purposes. And so that's where those feelings started. um, you'd be and everybody was in a line, these long lines to register because it was all done. You had to show
okay.
up and register, sign up for classes. Mind you, this was in 76 when I started, and so nothing was like it is now. Couldn't do it at your home and get on your laptop. You had to show up, hope you didn't get closed out of a class, somebody in line in front of you. And there always seemed to be one line with all the Black people. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was easy, other than looking at us, to tell that, we were there and we got certain assist. Some people saw that as a handout.
Mm-hmm.
I, didn't, because it took me years and years and years to pay back all of those loans, and it took me as much study as anybody else to get through it. So again, I'm not ashamed to say I was a benefactor of affirmative action, and I'm proud of it, because I didn't get any different tests than anybody sitting
Yeah,
next to
no,
me.
for sure.
Yeah, so that started it. And then the students, not all, because I do have a few close friends from law school who are Caucasian, but I had many who um, saw you. I think what I talked about them was you could, if you got in the Black Law Students Association started about my second year there. And we, of course, got into that. But we faced this dual, I heard someone refer to it as a dual glass ceiling, one because we were women and one because we were Black.
Yeah, the double
And
whammy.
there was always a women's law organization, but we got, if you became involved in that, you were treated the differently because you were a Black woman.
Oh, interesting.
Not by all, but certainly by the leadership at the time. I can definitely recall. Um, so then you'd go to the Black Law Students Association, and there was a patriarchy. And this is not a criticism of our men at all, because I'm the mother of two sons. But there was probably on our part and their part this just sort of a feeling that, well, the men take charge. Again, this was the 70s.
That was the culture then.
Yeah, it was very cultural, and we wanted to be accepted. And so I'm sure it's different. But I think then it was implicit on our
Mhm.
part and on the Black male students' part that that's how it was, because it had never been addressed, at
Okay.
least in the environments I had been in at that time. It had not been addressed. Now it's very different, but you have to recognize and address the issues to realize they exist.
For sure.
And so it was an interesting experience. It was a stressful experience. It was I had a lot of anger
Hmm.
for a lot of years, looking back over growing up here and then those experiences. I had a lot of anger.
So let's
Um,
talk about how you process that, because I'm sure you're not the only one that has been angry at these at racism or misogyny or some of these other structural barriers. What is your, if you look at one of your lowest days when you're facing some of those challenges, what got you to the next day? Do you
the,
have a mantra, a ritual? What made you get to that next point?
the only looking back, the only thing I can say is God. I,
Okay.
I did not, I was raised in church and in Sunday school, but took a detour in college and, probably up through the time I started having children. But that had, when you're ingrained with certain morals and values, you never lose it. It
Hmm.
just kind of sits there in the background. So looking back, I know had there not been a God, I would not have a piece of paper because of the
I say
anger.
the same thing for me.
Yes, because of the anger and the lack of a mature way to deal with that anger
Hmm.
in certain situations. Looking back, I should have been fired sometimes from jobs because I wasn't mature enough to handle what I was confronted with. So now I have a saying that I like to tell my sons and young when I mentor. I say you need to act as confident or more confident than the most mediocre white man, because I have worked with a lot of mediocre white men who have climbed the ladder to the top. And I'm, for a long time, it would amaze me how that happens. But that is, and if it makes me guilty of critical race theory to believe and say that, that's what it is. We have certain institutions believe that those who rise to the top should look like they've always looked, and that is a
Which is
white
white
man,
man. Yeah.
no matter how mediocre their skills are or their lack of
Mm-hmm.
skills. And so I've learned that, and they come with all the confidence in the world. You would
All
think
of it.
some are the
That they created the
smartest
world.
people in the world, but when you really break it down and I listen to some of them, I'm like, no, this is not, and I'm not afraid to do this, but I've learned how to challenge that in different ways that
That's what's
gets
more productive.
more accomplished
Yeah.
than expressing that anger. Um, and I'm not ashamed to admit that, yeah, I'm an angry Black woman. I'm angry because of the way we've been treated and continue to be treated. But I've learned how to deal with that anger in ways that are effective to break some of those institutions down. And I've learned that you've got to, that you have to have confidence, because a lot of those at the top are so mediocre and lacking in skills that it almost makes you just sit and say, wow, you know,
Yes, I
wow.
totally, yeah, I totally understand. And I think that is wonderful, your thought process and turning your anger into ways that you can be effective and productive, which is one I'm assuming is becoming an attorney and being in a position to actually create change using your voice, which I can see and hear now, and really telling your story and your experiences, and then talking to others and sharing that with others. What would you say? This is a fun question.
Mm,
What would you say is the title of your album cover for your that explains your Driven Wild Black story?
ooh,
So, what is the title of your album cover that explains
mm.
your Driven Wild Black story?
That's, as much as I love music, that's a difficult one. An album cover for
Your Driven Wild Black story. What's your title?
what it goes back to an album that I loved when I was growing up, that kind of just opened my eyes, and it's one that I would have to get copyright permission to use, but it's just, I'm Black and I'm proud.
Come on and say it loud.
Yeah, yes. That kind
Okay.
of, when that album came out, it was like James Brown. Oh my gosh, that was it. That
Oh,
was
that's
it, and
awesome.
that's still it. Like I said, I'm not ashamed to say I've benefited from affirmative action. I've benefited from, student loans being available. I would not have had an opportunity to go had it not been for that. I'm not ashamed of the label angry Black woman, but I bet I can use that anger to tackle in the best mediocre white man that there is.
No,
So,
that's right.
yeah, I would still say I'm Black and I'm proud, and I'll say it loud.
Yes, I love it. Well, thank you so much. Is there any other parting words you want to leave with us, with the people?
No, just that continue to discover who you are and what drives you. What are your your I'm assuming we're all gonna be Black. I can't change this and I don't want to,
Hello.
but
Okay.
find something that really drives you, that you're passionate about, and that makes you happy, and do that, pay attention to what's going on around you, and what really drives you, what you're passionate about.
Yes, that's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much. If people wanted to stay in touch with you, how can folks stay in touch with you?
They could email me at jdmarbley@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was
You're
so
welcome.
awesome. I
Great.
appreciate you and your time.
Thank you for asking me. I enjoyed the conversation.